Captain Rip Torn is on stage. He's going to moderate the next panel. He's assembled representatives who lead the safety teams of the FAA and NAV Canada, as well as other industry experts. And it's a perfect segue from our opening discussion. Rip, it's all yours.
Thank you, Captain Harrison. Good morning, everyone. Well, what a tough act to follow. But welcome to the second day of the Safety Forum. For those I haven't met yet, I'm Rip Torn. I'm the chairman of your Air Traffic Services group for ALPA. Today I'll be moderating a panel discussion advancing ATC Now. So this is a good segue into what was discussed previously, sort of at a strategic level. We're going to get into some specific activities going on. And we've assembled a broad panel of keynote speakers to give this overview of U.S. and Canadian airspace modernization, along with how the two agencies are collaborating to harmonize these air traffic operations. How many in the room here are air traffic control experts? Just raise your hand real quick. It's like the cargo question. It's a trick question. If you use ATC as a pilot, especially as a ATP-rated operator, you guys are experts. You may not know what's going on that side of the mic, but we're moving the pieces around. So very important, everyone has to understand some of the things that are going on and how we're going to move this along here. But globally, air navigation service providers are focused on enabling these new capabilities, of improving efficiencies and modernizing an aging infrastructure. The global airspace structure is constantly evolving as efficient communication, navigation, and surveillance and harmonized data exchange is evolving to meet the needs of our aviation community. So our panel is going to take a closer look into the modernization processes and provide an insight for what can be done now to enable these new capabilities. We have distinguished members today on our panel from regulatory and commercial agencies to discuss the current advances that can be leveraged now to improve communications while future system and applications are being developed. So I'm going to introduce everyone one at a time, and I'm going to give them a few minutes to make a statement, and then we're going to go into some questions, and we hope that you'll be sending us some questions as well. So first on my left is Mr. Terry Biggio. He's the Vice President of Air Traffic Organization, Safety and Technical Training for the FAA. Terry?
Thank you, Rip. So first, ALPA, thank you very much for the invitation, my second year in a row. I really enjoyed it last year and looking forward to it this year. And for Rip and for this panel, I mean, you heard from Neil and Terry all about collaboration. It just continues to be a driving force for us. Not only, we had a meeting yesterday with CATCA and NAV Canada and ALPA and NATCA as well, and working on one of those things that that we see as trends. But we could not do it without this team, without the team in the field. I'm just happy to be here.
Very good. And to his left is Mr. Larry Lachance, who was quoted earlier in the panel discussions. Mr. Lachance is the Vice President of Safety and Quality Organization for NAV Canada. Larry?
Yeah, so on the, again, thank you for inviting me again. I guess we did a good job the last time around. So actually, I want to echo what was said earlier, but at the same time, I'd like to talk about some of the areas that we're working right now in order to improve ATC Now. A couple of the areas we'll have a deeper conversation about it, but we're really focusing these days on predictability, and predictability for your purpose and predictability for an ATC purposes as well. So we're going to talk a bit more about data link communications, satellite ADS-B, and other ATM functionality that we're using. And you heard it yesterday, it's really about human factor, human performance, And that's the take we have on this. The more we free the brain activities of our ATC controllers when it comes to memory, when it comes to application and so on, the better we're positioned to provide you the elements that you need to conduct your flight safely. So we're going to talk a bit more about this.
Thank you, Larry. To his left is Mr. Steve Hansen. Steve is the chairman of the National Safety Committee for NATCA. Steve?
Thanks, Rip, and thanks, Alpa, for having us here. I saw you, Mike, and you raised your hand when and you said you were an air traffic specialist. I've worked with you. I'm not sure that's true. Anyway, and I think I'm out of place. I wore gray, and everybody else wore blue or black, and I think I'm like out of place. But anyway, I certainly look forward to the conversation today, and I come at it from a little different perspective. I'm not the technical person, but I come at it from a safety perspective and kind of look at it from that lens. So I'm not the technical person. So when they start spouting off builds and all these other things and specific little algorithms, that's not me. But I certainly can bring the air traffic perspective from the safety side. I work with Terry all the time. I work with many of the people on the panel quite often, so it's a good panel.
Thank you, Steve. And to his left is Captain Mark Bradley. Captain Bradley is a technical pilot for industry affairs at Delta Airlines, a longtime friend and very active on behalf of industry in these efforts. So, Mark?
Yes, good morning. First of all, I'd like to thank ALPA for inviting me to sit on this panel as a 29-year ALPA member. It's gratifying to see that conferences and discussions like this, forward-leaning discussions by this group, great group. Good to see. Relative to NextGen, one of the other duties, if you will, that I have is I'm the industry chair for the Performance-Based Operation Aviation Rulemaking Committee. It's a mouthful. We call it the PARC. It may be familiar to many of you. And in that committee, we spend a lot of time working issues directly related to NextGen. We build the watches in that meeting instead of tell the time. So if I get too detailed, it's probably because I'm repeating what I heard from all the way smarter people on my committee. But I think there's no doubt about it that we're trying to evolve and move quickly, sometimes never quick enough, to modernize aviation. Oftentimes, I have to bring the members of the committee up out of the weeds and ask them to think about where we've been and where we are today and where we're going tomorrow. So when you look at it from a high-level perspective, it's pretty amazing where we've been in 50 years. There's lots of room for growth and movement in the right direction. But the safety component is always prevalent, if not the number one priority while we're doing this. So this is a great venue. I appreciate you having me come here, and hopefully we'll have some good discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Finally, on the end, last but not least, is our own Captain James Duke. He is our ALPA pilot, who is our subject matter expert on the FAA's NextGen program, member of our Air Traffic Services Committee, and been associated with us about as long as I've been working this, so he's definitely a wealth of knowledge. So, Jim?
Thanks, Rip. I'd like to thank the panel. I'd like to thank ALPA as well for the opportunity to come back and be a volunteer. I spent years as a central and staff guy and volunteer, went off to the FAA and came back and get to fly the line. And that's what we represent. We're the line pilots. We're the voice of you, and we need your inputs, and we try to represent you in industry and make sure that what's designed out there, I am one of the guys helping build the watch, but what's designed out there is something that we can fly with routinely every day in the NAS. We don't have to do the workarounds. We design the safety into the system and the new systems that are being developed, and it's really a privilege to work for the airline pilots. Thanks.
Before we get started into our question and discussion section, just wanted to put a little scope on the course of our discussion we're going to have up here today. Obviously, the big topic of interest in air traffic control right now politically is the air traffic control system reform that's being debated in Congress or not debated in some areas. Our primary concern on this is stable funding and stability going forward as we implement this. I'm going to ask that we're not going to be entertaining questions on those issues because it is still so fluid. And I think there's some more technical areas that we need to get into that would be of more interest into what's happening now, not what's going to possibly be happening in the future. So I just ask that you limit your questions away from that area. Not that we don't want to discuss them, but because of what I've asked everyone to come here and focus on. So with that, I'm going to ask if anyone has questions. Remember, you can text them in or come up here to the mic when it's time to do that. We're going to start with a couple of lead-in questions, and hopefully we'll get some thought processes started and challenge the audience to, challenge our speakers, to come into some maybe new perspectives or other ways, or answering what's bothering you about some of this activity going on. So my first question I'm going to throw out to everyone: how has global and regional cooperation been used to overcome the challenges of implementing new capabilities where there is shared airspace borders necessitating a high degree of interaction and harmonization?
You know, the more we go global, and nothing will stop us going global because it's a reality today. The more we go global, the more there's a need for really harmonization and standardization. And you know, you heard it from Terry and Neil. We're spending a lot of time these days on the technical side and on the procedure development side to make sure that we are harmonized as much as possible, because it's pretty hard with the automation system these days for an entity, an NASP, to go one way and another NASP to go the other way. It doesn't work that way anymore. So the communication protocol, the technology implementation, the alignment of the procedure, you cannot get away from that. And more so in the future, when you're looking at the swim capability, you know, the established protocol that are being worked on the international level will kind of mandate the route that you need to take when it comes to coordination elements between ANSPs worldwide. So I don't think anymore it's an option. If you don't get on board the right way, there's additional costs involved, technology changes, and so on. So I guess from my perspective, it's a good thing that we're continuously forced to be more standardized in our approach, and it can only serve, you know, the pilot community as far as I'm concerned.
You know, we spend a lot of time on the strategic side talking with NAV Canada and NAC and others, but I think where it truly applies to you all is when you look at New York is the center of the universe. I don't know if everybody recognizes that, right? But for those of you that have sat, you know, have been in the cockpit on the taxiway waiting to launch out of Newark, LaGuardia, or Kennedy, New York, as our system goes, as New York goes. Had we not had the tactical side, the discussions that happen on an every 2-hour basis with NAV Canada, you know, and with the airline community, right, to ensure that we can try to maximize those departures. We call them the escape routes out of New York. You know, and we go through Canadian airspace to get you all out, and it makes a big difference for us when you look at the weather pattern that we have. It's mostly northwest to southeast aligned. It moves this way, and the routes close, and we're kind of stuck often. And had we not had with our controllers, with SysOps, with NAV Canada, there's times where you guys would not be getting out as quick as you have. And I know sometimes it's an eternity, but please know what goes on behind the scenes is an awful lot of collaboration, discussion to make sure that we maximize that partnership with NAV Canada.
Just sort of from the flight deck perspective that we can all relate to is when I fly to China or I fly through Middle Eastern airspace or I fly into France or England, as a pilot, we're always concerned with how do they do it versus how do we do it. We have a lot of references we use. that's sort of the daily operations that we have to deal with as pilots. Relative to that, I think participation, global harmony won't happen until everybody from those representative areas sits at the table and has discussions. That has to happen. So whether it's through various trade organizations, whether it's through IATA, whether it's through ICAO, presence is critical for certainly the U.S. aviation operation to be. We want to be present at those meetings to discuss the challenges operationally on the air traffic control side in the flight deck. And I think we've done a decent job of that. We have to do better, but that's so important relative to achieving what we're trying to achieve, which is when I fly to China and when I fly through the Middle East and in the U.S., it's all the same. It's standard. Something we should not continue. We should continue chasing, I think.
It's critical that how we do things here in the U.S. are the same way we do things when I go into London or into Charles de Gaulle. Case in point is a descend via clearance. If there's any ambiguity, let's figure out the way to do it the most standardized way so that when the Germans come to the U.S., they do it the same way here in the U.S. as they do it in Frankfurt. And vice versa. When I go to Spain, I do it the same way as I do it at Washington Dulles. So ALPA we spend a lot of time and effort figuring out where to spend your dues resources to get to these meetings, to work these critical issues. And that's just a simple one. You'd think it would be a no-brainer, but it takes a lot of time and effort sometimes to get people to come to the same conclusion that is intuitively obvious to us in the cockpit. So I thank people, our Canadians and our service provider and our regulators who really aren't up here, but it's they listen. You know, we're a voice. You know, we're one of many voices, but when we're out there and our fellow friends on the other side of the mic, these are the people that come to the table, and yes, they may have a different point of view, but in the end, if it's about safety, we all walk out of the room, or at least within a year or two or three, with the same conclusion.
And I think Line Up and Wait really kind of pointed that out, where we had probably more than half of our controllers that we represent said, no way, we don't need to change, it works, and they put up a pretty big fight about changing it. We went through the change, and it was the right thing to do. And we should do that in as many places as we can. But the most important thing would be educating the workforces of the importance of making the change for harmonization's sake and for standardization across the industry. Because when that's not done and there's a change that's just forced upon you, not that we're in that mode, then there's some sort of resistance. So having that education up front with the controller workforce for the harmonization is very important. And some other things that we do, just to kind of switch topics a little bit, is through our voluntary safety reporting programs, we are able to deal with some of the foreign air carriers, whether it's ASAP for the pilots or ATSAP for the controllers. We also have a confidential information share program where we have agreements with, I think it's 25 airlines now, where we share ASAP and ATSAP data back and forth. And we're able to address things, with like some of the Mexican airlines, or across the border to the north with NAV Canada. We recently had a fix that was named very similar, one in Boston airspace and one across the border in Canada. And if they typed it in wrong, they were going into Canada, and or vice versa, right? So we worked with NAV Canada, and that's on the slate, if it hasn't been done already, to change that fix so that we don't have that confusion anymore. So that was a big thing. Although very small in the whole scheme of things, all these things add up and really make the system better and safer. So,
when it comes to the climb via, descend via, it's all about the data for us on the safety and the training side. Where's the data pointing us? And ATSAP has truly helped us garner that data, and it pointed us towards developing recurrent training. For all of our controllers, we do this every 6 months. And the instructor-led portion, we invest a lot of time, effort, and money into developing these products, but we recognized that climb via, descend via was a problem, and now we actually have a recurrent training module that is going out to our controllers actually in this session.
Not only did we work with NAV Canada, because they had a series of videos, and we got permission to use those as kind of a baseline, but we also worked with ALPA and had them they took part as in the videos and part of the discussions and that sort of thing. So it was certainly a partnership, and we continue to work that, right? That's not just the only thing, but we continue to work. I mean, Mike's famous. Mike Shields, if you haven't seen him, he's in a really nice video. Listen here, youngsters.
We go out, we talk to our academy new hires every 5 weeks now, and that's one of the videos that we show them. So you are truly famous, so when you get someone that's going to ride in the cockpit, they're going to recognize you at some point because, hey, you're the guy in the video. But I will tell you, it's one of the first videos that I've really seen developed by us that is really, it grabs that younger workforce, and it gets the point home, which is complete the picture about weather. But again, it shows the partnership with ALPA, NATCA, and others in NAV Canada to come up with decent products.
Leads into another question then, is what are your organizations seeing as significant cultural issues associated with implementing these new capabilities?
Okay. Well, from our perspective, you know, we did implement over the years a lot of new technology. I think right now, from a culture point of view, our ATC folks have developed with time an appetite for these changes, and sometimes now it's the other way around. Sometimes if we are very proactive in implementing some of the change that they request, you know, the patient is not there anymore. So it's kind of a reverse. The culture is ready, it's there. Any technology implementation change that we do right now is either driven by them for some of the changes, or to bring to them. They know that we're going to bring to them the environment that will make their job easier and in a position to provide a better service to you folks. A good example of that is that, if I may, it's the daily link communication, whereby we have developed with the controllers a system that, you know, if we want to talk to you via sat voice communication, they just click on the tag, they recognize the dialing automatically, and we can talk to you via sat phone immediately. The reverse is about to happen in the near future, where you're going to call the sector that is responsible for your flight directly, and that'll be routed through the ATM system. So again, we're trying to give them, and they know that, they recognize that, we're trying to give them as many tools as possible to free their own brain to provide you the most predictability environment, you know, when it comes to weather, wake turbulence issue, and so on. So that is the strategy right now to you know, the monitoring aspect. We're not good human at monitoring, so we do a lot of changes in our technology to monitor activities, free their own time to support you.
So there's I'm sorry, go ahead. Rip, just one comment. You know, this is change management at its finest. We've all been through it in some form or another. And if you look at what the evolution of all of the modernization issues that have come up, think of it this way. I was an instructor for a while, and I remember working with pilots that were seeing glass cockpits for the first time. Some had been flying 30, 35 years. And it was such a huge change that now is the norm. Pilots that we're seeing today, some of them started flying glass cockpits, GPS-based nav. So it's navigating through that change that's the biggest challenge, whether it's on the controller side, the pilot side, the procedure side. I think that, you know, we talk often about how do we bridge until we finally have a homogeneous fleet that all can fly RNAV, RNP procedures, and all has ADS-B equipage. That's the biggest challenge. But you know, it's good to hear when Terry talked about recurrent training for controllers. I had no idea they had no recurrent training in terms from a standardized perspective, maybe at the local facility level. We've been doing it as pilots as long as I've been flying airplanes. We have recurrent training. We just love to go back, but we got to do it. So I think that change management is really the key. People communicating back and forth, you know, understanding both sides of the mic, understanding what a controller has to deal with when he manages traffic into a high-density area like New York or Atlanta or Chicago. and understanding what a pilot has to do when he gets a change of his routing, that's all pre-programmed. And once they understand respectively better, it really helps get through that change management. And that's so important. It's good to know about the training piece too.
Yeah, he makes a good point about change management, right? We have probably for decades, right? Weather. There's certainly these myths within air traffic that pilots have better weather radar, so why should I give him that radar or weather? They know more than I do. They know what they're getting the briefs, and I don't get the briefs, and they see it. They're already deviating, so I don't have to do anything. So addressing the culture from an air traffic perspective, there's some that have been around for decades, and then you have the next gen stuff that's coming along. Just talk about TBFM. TBFM was dropped in the centers 15 years ago, and everybody ignored it because it didn't work. There's no training around it. Training came out about 2 years ago. Finally, 2 years ago. It's a great tool, right? It could help enhance the system, but when they dropped it in 15 years ago, everybody kind of ignored it, turned it off, and then kept on doing their business. But going from we're going to vector you around everything to a trajectory-based operation, that's going to be a huge, huge culture change. And for pilots and controllers, because no, you shouldn't probably take that shortcut, and we shouldn't offer you the shortcut because we need to keep you on that path because everything is timed. That's going to be a huge change, and we're going through that right now and trying to get TBFM to work in all the centers and then all the stuff that hangs off it. And I'm not an expert in all that, so I won't try to be. But TBFM needs to work for everything else to work, and then you can actually go to a TBO type of operation. So that's probably our biggest challenge right now, along with weather and how you deal with VFR aircraft and that sort of thing. But they continue to be our biggest cultural issues within the air traffic control workforce.
Just a quick translation: time-based flow management and time-based operations. So a lot of trajectory. I'm sorry, but it'll be time-based operations.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. But correction to my correction there, or expansion, I guess. Jim, you wanted to say something?
And this change management theme is a great one. I think it's a good way to look at it. And just from on your side of the mic, when you get changes and now all makes sense to the controller workforce, to the pilot workforce, we have to make sure that we understand that this is why we don't do it. We shouldn't just be told to sit down and color or to follow along the magenta line, because the magenta line changed when we accepted that CPDLC clearance. We need to understand why the change was made. So little things like for weather, those make sense. You don't have to write a book, but it's one of those things that as this evolves, ALPA needs to be at the table while this is going on so that we can communicate it out to our members, and management needs to be at the table so they can communicate it out in the training. You can't emphasize that enough, and the right kind of training. Don't want to forget that, but we don't want to have to hit the enter button 16 times to get to the next module. We want to be able to understand what's going on, and that way, if you're informed, you tend to comply with the system as opposed to question it. So.
And Rip, if I can add one more to that. So the value of the flight deck training program, first of all, a big thank you to the pilot community in this room, because that is a big change management issue that helps us tremendously. We're always trying to figure out how do we train these new millennials that are much older or much younger than some of us, and how do we get that hook into them to get them to grasp onto exactly what's going on in the system. Flight deck training, I think we do about 5,500 flights or trips a year. You guys make a big difference and a big impact on our controller workforce to get them to understand the why, as we figure out how does a millennial think, because they do think differently, and how do we appeal to them, and the flight deck training program is one of those examples.
So is that something you're thinking that we could probably get the FAM program back?
So it's back.
But back in a big way, so that
It's not in a big way. So there's a number of impediments that we've been trying to work through. We used to do the old paper thing, right? We just switched to an automated system. I think we've got about 500 individuals through it. It took us a while to get it back after 9/11, and we've got it back. It's not as robust as it used to be. We have restrictions on us because of issues that have been highlighted for us to go back and fix. But even with those restrictions, it's still about 5,500 a year.
We're about to wrap up our time here, but I just really want to thank everyone for their time coming here, your expertise and your dedication to moving the modernization of our future, continuing in a forward direction. Just to summarize a few points that were made and things to keep in mind. Communications, navigation, surveillance, traffic management. To move it forward is going to require cooperation and collaboration. I think you'll agree that we're all in the middle of this. We're going to have some challenges with mixed mode operations, information management from the pilot side. As these things come out there, we're going to have to focus on different pieces, including training. And change is coming. We're going to have to know how to handle all that going forward, and with the cooperation of the regulators, of the service providers, of our companies and our advocates, we're going to continue to make good forward progress. So, with that, we're as an association, we're going to continue to engage and talk about these technical issues here in the U.S. with Canada through ICAO and the other regions, including Mexico. I was down there last week. Had the privilege of addressing some of these issues down south of the border. A lot of interest in cooperation in that direction as well. Really encourage anyone with any interest in getting involved in some of this technical work, come and see me. And I really want to thank our pilot volunteer subject matter experts in here. It's pretty phenomenal how quickly some of these volunteers have picked up the information. They are considered world experts in those areas. Our engineering and air safety staff as well, providing us expertise and continuity in our efforts to remain engaged and collaborate with our industry partners. So with that, I thank everyone. I thank you for your attention. I hope we addressed your questions, and if not, come and see us, and remember to tip your waitresses on the way out the door. So thank you.